everyone.
Thank you. All right, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. We have a great event on tap. I'm really excited about this conversation we're going to be having. But before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for either one of our speakers, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use that question and answer tab right there in your interface and submit your question, and we'll try to get to as many as we can near the end of today's webinar. We also have a very interactive chat feature, so I do encourage you to chat us your questions, comments, suggestions, whatever you got, send it on over. We might even be able to include part of it in today's conversation. All right, and finally, at the end of today's webinar, we are going to be doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you'll be one of our 4 lucky winners. All right, with that, let's go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is cloud security breaches and how to prevent them. Our speakers today are John Frericks, who is the Technical Marketing Manager at Ops Compass, and Benjamin Robinson, who is the Senior Product Manager at Ops Compass. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Charlene.
You bet, you bet. Well, you guys, I'm so excited about this conversation you guys are going to have. I'm going to take myself off camera, put myself on mute. I'll be back when we get to the question and answer period, so enjoy the heck out of yourselves.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll just do a quick intro because she already introduced us pretty well. But yeah, if you guys are adopting the cloud right now or just trying to tame a mess, security is critical, and making security part of your cloud operations brings forth a number of challenges. One of the biggest challenges that has been in the forefront of the news the last 18 months is preventing, the challenge of preventing a security breach. And that's why today's webinar exists. Most of you watching this, if you've typed in cloud breach into your Google, you probably have seen promoted ads for various breach reports breaking down high-profile incidents that have happened across the country. We've got one of those reports too, and we're about to publish another one. But our goal here is not only to shine some light on the specific incidents that happened to certain companies, but we want to dive into the actual reasons across the board of why this happened, why these happened. So from misconfigurations to trusting a third party, to flat out misuse. So welcome to this webinar, Cloud Security Breaches and how to prevent them. But I'd like to introduce today's guest speaker with me, our Senior Product Manager at Ops Compass, Benjamin Robinson. What's up, Ben?
Hey, John.
So yeah, we're going to talk today about the ways that these things happen. And Gartner, we all love Gartner, and they say some very comforting things, which is, through 2025, 99% of cloud security failures will be the customer's fault. So thanks, Gartner, for that reassuring information. But, misconfigurations, the cloud is built on misconfigurations. And so that is, according to Verizon and various other sources, misconfigurations are going to be are the second leading cause of breaches from last year. So, Benjamin, how do you feel about that?
It is definitely a disconcerting number. So Verizon's number, 22%, second to 45%, which is direct hacking attacks, malicious actors. It's pretty big number. And the surprising thing about that number is, as we have started to automate things and have a pipeline, that number has grown. And Gartner predicts that it will continue to grow, as does Verizon. So it's likely that misconfiguration is going to, maybe not usurp hacking directly, but, it definitely is instrumental to these breaches, which breach maybe not the best term for a misconfiguration, right? The other thing about that number that's interesting is Verizon's report is not specific to cloud incidents. So when we look at actual cloud breaches specifically, that number of misconfigurations involved in a breach is far higher than 22%. Probably well over 50% from the sample that we did, which is in our report, it was at 62%. And this is, it's something that it definitely is difficult because a misconfiguration sounds like it's completely preventable. And in a lot of ways, it ought to be. But that isn't always the case. A lot of these misconfigurations are from good intentions or assuming that there are compensating controls in place, such as, hey, I thought that was behind our firewall. I didn't realize it was publicly exposed. So being able to identify these things is becoming more and more important. And with the cloud, the native cloud portal provider tools aren't, they don't necessarily do a great job of communicating this information. So there is a need and a growing need for additional types of alerting mechanisms that show us where we have a misconfiguration. And that's where we at Ops Compass have our cloud security posture management CSPM tool, which tracks. One of the main things that it does is tracks changes to your cloud configurations. That also allows us to say, hey, this configuration is not in accordance with the security framework's requirements. So this is probably a misconfiguration or something that could be improved.
So yeah, why do you see that or how do you feel that misconfigurations that are increasing, and how is that an issue right now? Why do you think the misconfigurations are happening more and more?
It's an interesting question. We used to have vulnerability management as a good solution for making sure that we were patching proactively. And as we go cloud, and really go cloud, like right now, if you're doing shift and lift and you're using VMs and deploying them to the cloud, you still have this great concern with whether you're proactively patching. Even if you go next level and start getting into containerization, you still have to do patching. There's all kinds of terrifying numbers for default profiles for Docker and other container solutions not being current, right? Like a vast majority of these things are shipped out to the cloud so that users can draw from them and use them to easily get up and running, but they're not proactively updated. So patching stays a concern. Then when you get to where you're fully cloud native, vulnerability management isn't really going to help you a lot, right? Because now what we're talking about are cloud specific assets that are just defined JSON that might just be an API call or stands up a service or it's a function app or whatever that service that it is providing is not something that a vulnerability management solution, even though they are getting better, can really address. Vulnerability management solutions are also largely a hindsight 2020 thing, right? A lot of times you're only benefiting from, oh no, we're out of date on this version, this needs to be updated. When you get into cloud configuration, it's not necessarily that something becomes outdated. It's that something either changes or something was initially misconfigured or something that was previously protected by something else now becomes exposed. So keeping this awareness of where you have these deviations from what a known good profile looks like, even that can change over time, right? So this shouldn't be surprising, especially because we move faster, that there's always going to be change, and how we're managing that change has to adapt as well. And this is why we've seen. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, you talk about the deviations and the changes in the configurations. You mentioned the native tools, and can you give some examples of some visibility gaps that native tools provide?
For one, and this is kind of an interesting outcome of the CSPM space, is it's driving these cloud providers to start providing some of the tooling that CSPM has been providing. So compliance reports are one of these things. Not all of the cloud providers have a nice compliance report. I didn't say compliance report, did I? Anyway, being able to select the framework that your organization uses and getting it delivered in that context is one of the great features that CSPM provides, right? It's an excellent feature set of Ops Compass for sure. We have various security and privacy frameworks that we support. So being able to see what that is in your own terms is something that the cloud providers aren't doing. If you are getting a compliance report, it's generally going to be whatever they elected to use as a framework, or it's going to be their own internal framework or set of security controls recommendations. So it doesn't have that flexibility of translating to the customer's language necessarily.
Gotcha. So how can organizations, do you think, can reduce the likelihood of these misconfigurations?
Obviously CSPM is a good ad, right? Testing, being aware of what your public footprint is, using currently available public services like Shodan and Census, Spiderfoot, these things that allow us to say, this is what is visible to the internet. And comparing that to what you believe should be accessible to the internet. Like these are internal audits that really should be done at a regular cadence by organizations. That's to catch things that have already happened. To catch things before they happened, you really should be testing your development branches against whatever tooling that is out there that can say, hey, this is a bad configuration. There are cloud native tools that allow you to say, hey, this does align to our defined policy requirements. We use templates to, restrict what we can and can't do. We have baseline configurations that we deploy. All of these things, though, need to be managed. They need to be adapted over time. And this is complicated because your cloud service offerings change over time, and developers always looking for the best solution a lot of times are in front of what the security or operations side of the organization can keep up with.
And we've all heard the term the cloud center of excellence, and whether it's real or not, but it sounds to me like when it comes to being aligned on what actually is going on, could also dip into the misuse category. But as far as misconfigurations, do you think when it comes to a breach that some of these organizations that have had these incidents happen, do you think they were day to day monitoring everything that was going on and were aligned as far as that goes with the best practices?
Absolutely. And I mean, this is the thing, is breaches make people look bad, right? They make you look like you're negligent, that you are not doing the right things. One of the trends that we saw continuing this year was publicly exposed Elasticsearch servers. This was, a big trend late, I think 2019 or something like that, where people started scanning for exposed Elasticsearch servers with, publicly accessible. And it's something where, well, if everybody's doing the right thing, hey, do we use Elasticsearch? Yeah, we do. Well, let's lock this down. But well over a year later, you're still seeing these occurrences of publicly exposed Elasticsearch servers. Microsoft had a case where, it was like 250 million records exposed from a few Elasticsearch instances, I believe. That's Microsoft. Like, they are doing all of the right things. Like, they were the first cloud provider to have FedRAMP, right? All of these things are the right things to do, but the right thing, again, it changes over time. That's why it's hard to keep up with it. So this is where, balancing everything with defense in depth, there's a lot that you can do from a security perspective, where what you're trying to do is make sure that if you do have a misstep, that it's caught somewhere else. So for something to fall through all of these brackets is what is really troubling, right? Especially with an organization like Microsoft, where you do know that they are doing the right things. It's complicated. There's not an easy answer to this, and this is where the CSPM is phenomenal for identifying misconfigurations, but it has to be utilized. It has to be maintained, right? Like, we have to stay in front of authoring checks and adapting to the resource types that are out there, and making sure that we're giving customers the right guidance that they need, so that they don't have to do the legwork that we do. So it's, as with everything, it's all built on trust, which, you're always kind of balancing trusting with, hey, let me trust but validate, which is something that we like to say, right? So,
Right.
and this is, one of the things that misconfiguration is a big result of, I already said change, but more accurately, we have a very different change management landscape than we did a few years ago. Most people have started to move towards things being more agile and less prescriptive. We have to move faster. We're not really slowing down to do, not that agile excuses documentation. If you're doing agile right, you should actually have more documentation. But a lot of times we use this as an excuse to kind of cut some corners so that we can move faster. So, communication is absolutely key, because if you have somebody with the best intentions making a change, that change needs to be propagated throughout the organization. Most organizations,
yeah, that was kind of what I was piggybacking off of the question I asked you about, like, people being on the same page. It's almost the the day-to-day using the best practices and the things that you agreed on as a team would trust each other to prevent this security event. And we're talking a lot about CSPM, but like, how can a CSPM solution, or a company, the way the companies think, how does that help manage misconfigurations, like on a day-to-day thing?
can you reiterate that?
Yes. So I know I kind of talked in circles there, but yeah, how does a CSPM solution help manage misconfigurations, like or prevent a misconfiguration on a day-to-day basis?
So, without trying to go too deep into what the product does and doesn't do, think of them as canned templates, are compliance frameworks. They can readily identify if, say, you have an S3 bucket that has public access configured. That will show up on a compliance report as a resource or group of resources not being in compliant. Users are also able to see and discover this through examining the drift and defining drift concerns that focus on things that they care about. So you could have a drift concern that says, I want to know about storage, and it will address all of the storage concerns that you have for that resource type. So it's basically giving you that visibility in order to allow you to check your resource configurations. And ideally, you're catching this in dev before it's deployed to production, right? So
cool. Yeah. I mean, so it's like you might take the word misuse and add that and think the same thing with the misconfiguration. But could you define to me or explain to me what the difference is between a misconfigure and just straight up misuse? Because you could be in the cloud and working and spinning some stuff up and, accidentally leave it on. And then now you literally have racked up a bill that you're going to get in trouble for. So that to me sounds just like straight up misuse. So what's the difference?
Great question, because it's, you're almost always conflating misconfiguration with permissions and, misuse, whether it's inadvertent by a user or malicious by a threat actor. But when you really divide these things, you can say, oh, there is a clear-cut difference. Misuse, this was designed as intended. We meant for this functionality to exist, right? A user then is able to use it in an unintended way or do a thing that they were not supposed to do, which those are two different things. So your misuse that we have seen, there have been, and again, I don't like calling some of these things breaches. They fell out of our report because they aren't really breaches, but a good example of misuse was Facebook's API call that supported third-party apps doing a search for user details by phone number. Well, there's an easy opportunity for me to scrape everything. Very similarly, LinkedIn, you can see certain information about somebody publicly, so you can now start to scrape all of that information. And this is something that people have been doing for years, and it's there was actually a guy that went to prison for AT&T a long time ago had a website, and he figured out that they were just using this surrogate value. So if he just plugged in all these different integers, he could get customer details. That was malicious hacking, right? But using an API at scale, what is the intent of it? Are you doing it for the right reasons, or are you not? And when you can't really gauge and prove that intent, that's what a breach is. That's what misuse is, right? So it's hard because there are very, very valid use cases for a lot of this information, or these supporting API calls, what have you. So it's really a fine line. And again, it's something that can change. When Facebook originally made that API call, it seemed like a good idea at the time. They didn't think about how it could be used to compromise user information. So that's kind of, there have been a few breaches that have related to that. And there are things where, that it's more complicated than misuse. That is also where, you are not properly designing something to all of the possibilities. You're designing it for the use case, right? You're not designing it to be secure. And
that makes sense too, because like with LinkedIn and Facebook, their excuse is not that they're not mature enough. They're the most mature in the cloud than you can think, I would assume. And so they're just like, this specific use case is why we need this. It's not negligence or not knowing what they're doing, because they're just as mature as anyone.
Yeah, and that there's. So I think this is also kind of a good segue to third parties being complicit in breaches. This Target HVAC vendor, there goes a bunch of credit card information. Wait, why does an HVAC vendor have access to that? In the news this weekend, I was just reading a similar incident with another HVAC vendor. There was a breach where a marketing department got a file very validly to help them do marketing, but that file contained a lot of very sensitive information that didn't help with the marketing effort. So people, we generally are very time constrained with our jobs. This is not from a lack of caring or laziness or not having enough people and enough eyes, right? Like, things still have to move. So a lot of this is just not slowing down enough to step back and say, wait a minute, even though we can do this, should we do this? There's, and this, I think this is one of the things that's really changed in IT in the past couple of decades. Storage used to be more expensive, but it was even more expensive to make a change. So when you were designing something, you said, well, if we think we might need this in the future, let's just go ahead and grab that social security number and store it. Do we really need to do that? Why do we need that social security number? And this is something where it still hasn't permeated. Like, everybody's known social security number is a bad thing to use unless you're the IRS for ages now. And yet you still have utility companies and things that are using social security number as an identifier because it's easy and you kind of can't blame them. But, one of the good changes that HIPAA's kind of facilitated is now people are doing insurance validation by last name and birth date, which tends to be unique enough, right? So that's a lot better than social. A lot of your medical practitioners, dentist office, optometrists, what have you, they're using your social in order to validate your insurance. Well, really, they just need the last four if they need anything. So it's one of these things where as data custodians of our own data in our personal lives, we always have to consider what we are sharing and why. Do you really need this much information? Do I have to give you this information? Can we do this another way? And in the convenience culture that we have right now, most people don't bat an eye at, hey, what's your phone number? I'm going to send you a text when your table's ready at a restaurant, pre-pandemic. Right. But, anyway, most people don't care. They're like, yeah, here's my phone. And it's like, well, do you know how easy it is for SIM swapping to happen? Like you should be, and how much sensitive information do you have on that device? I'm not saying never give out your phone number. It's just, there is a level of due care that has to go with these things. And it can't be because I did something initially, it's okay to do these things going forward. And this is where, in the case of third parties, it becomes very, very difficult. And this is where compliance has actually been quite effective. Under the Affordable Care Act, one of the things that Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services did when they used the NIST Special Publication 800 series, which has been like the de facto federal standard for information security, as well as other guidance for a long time. They used that to create what they called MARZ, which was minimum acceptable requirements for security for exchanges, which, over time, the revisions of a lot of NIST guidance has kind of backed off of the federal information. And now we have NIST 800-171, which is a standard for private sector companies to protect controlled unclassified information, meaning they are doing things for federal organizations. They're hosting systems, designing systems, whatever. And they have to have a certain set of requirements met for that system. That system has a boundary so that you know where it is. So you say, this is the information that we have to protect, and this is how we're going to do it. And this is what needs to be done at that level. And that's where the way that they facilitated this being enforceable, and the IRS has done this forever. It's kind of weird, but if I'm the IRS and I'm authorizing you to store federal tax information, I make sure that everything that you do with that federal tax information is completely protected. What you do with the rest of your system that is outside of that boundary, I don't care about. Mm-hmm. It's not really that I don't care about, but the point is I have to require you to do what I can enforce and what I am accountable for. Obviously, I want to ask you to do perfect security for all things, right? But I can't test that, but I can test how you're using that FTI. And I can make sure that you're doing all the right things for that. So what CMS has done is they've said, if you're a third party and you contract out, you have to have these same set of requirements in place for everybody else.
Mhm.
Meaning, if I say that my system is a NIST moderate level system, these are the controls that have to be implemented. I require you as a partner to have that same set of security controls, and anybody that you work with that touches that system has to require the same things as well. So basically, you're responsible for making sure that the people that you hand things off to are doing the right things, so that I only have to check you. It's sort of like a reverse pyramid scheme almost, right? Like it's got to be sustainable, because I can't go and say, give me a list of everybody, and I got to make sure that they're getting independent assessments and doing all of the right things. All of these things are really complicated, and this is another aspect of why security is so complicated, right? Because it really does rely on not just good communication, but constant communication, almost, where that's not the topic of discussion. We're not sitting around designing an application where we should be talking about security for 70% of the time. That's not sustainable, right? Like, even security companies don't really do that. Security doesn't sell. Like, it's something that we are finally past the Chicken Little phase of, and we're getting to where we recognize the need for it. Everybody that, even non-IT security practitioners have heard of ransomware and breaches and all of these things. Like, it's in the news everywhere now. It's common play.
Yeah, it's becoming buzzwordy, in the public eye now. And I like the reverse pyramid scheme idea. We're gonna have to put that in our marketing efforts. But how, like, so we've already talked about the misconfigurations and misuse, and that stuff can, like, it's almost like if you trust a third party, someone to handle their data, they're gonna it's possible they'll misconfigure and misuse it too. So how would at a overall like an umbrella, pretty much, like, how would you use a CSPM tool to manage those types of third parties?
Well, you kind of can't directly, right? Like,
Yeah.
what you could do is, in your contracts, you could contractually obligate them to, for instance, if they're an integration partner, it might make sense, right? Because you guys are both consuming each other's APIs. And so you may say, as a requirement, we need you to provide us CSPM compliance reports so that I can periodically validate the state of your technical controls. That doesn't address, though, the administrative controls, the non-technical controls. And this is where, when it comes to some of these third-party breaches where they're involved, it does not mean that there was any sort of misconfiguration or vulnerability. It was a people error, right? Somebody took a file. It could have been perfectly encrypted and never emailed, and somebody thought it was okay to share this thing. Like, it broke down. Are there technical controls that can help with that? Yeah, there are. But this is why I keep saying it's complicated, right? Because it's not just a simple handoff. Unfortunately, there is not one tool to rule them all, as much as we would like for there to be. But this, CSPM is kind of filling this gap where SIMs are kind of, it's hard to do SIMs right. And over the years, we've gotten much better at saying, we do know of a thing called alert fatigue, and we do recognize that we have to prioritize information, and let's only consume things that we can actually act on. CSPM has that design paradigm in play where it's like, hey, what are the things that really matter? What do I need to know? You have to help your users be successful. So, and we already danced with vulnerability management and how we're kind of this infrastructure as code version of vulnerability management. I don't think we need to rehash that, but it's yeah. So
yeah,
No direct answer there, but I mean,
Right.
good question and a good challenge for how to make things better for sure.
Well, speaking of questions, thanks we got a couple questions in the Q&A, and it was right on time. So thank you, Armand, for submitting them. I was actually just going to talk about how, we saw that was it Logic Monitor's report said 83% of enterprise workloads will be in the cloud at the end of 2020, and so like for some of the 17% of them that want to get to the cloud that are still weighing the options, they're not born in it, they're doing the cloud, they're thinking about cloud adoption. Did you see many breaches that happen while organizations are migrating to the cloud? What are the best practices and services you can think of? But Armand said in the QA over here that said he wants to know if our applications and data are more secure on premise than on the cloud, and what strategies he can put in place to keep our his data and applications secure during and after migrating to the cloud.
It's a great question, and it is the assumption and loaded answer already, right? The assumption that on-prem is more secure than cloud. That was a big deterrent to a lot of people adopting to cloud years ago, right? How do I know it's safe? How do I have this visibility? But what you do gain by having that is this army of resources that are responsible for a very specific set of security requirements. So for instance, the data centers that are protecting your assets are physically protected with a lot more dollars backing it than most organizations can really put forward, because it's at scale, right? Like it's protecting a bunch of customers. So a lot of these legacy or private cloud data centers, that they're spending a lot of money in order to do these things, versus Google or Microsoft, where they can stand up data centers around the world because it's their information as well. And then, hey, let's leverage this. And this is why Amazon, I mean, way back in the day, everybody was like, wait, why is the former bookstore now selling everything and then they're going to get into cloud hosting? What? It seemed crazy, but amazingly forward thinking. So I think, Armand, to better answer your question, you really have to look at what your organization's risk tolerance is and what your data protection needs are. Look at what the cloud providers have documented system security plans, and that defines all of their security controls, and you can also get their attestations, which demonstrate that, hey, an independent third party determined that we are in good shape, not in good shape. So looking at those things and seeing, hey, are they doing as good a job or better of a job than we are for these controls? And do I understand what migrating to the cloud really means? If you just do a lift and shift where you're just migrating your VMs into a cloud and doing nothing else, then your on-prem is going to be more secure, most likely, because you already have your firewalls and appliances and you have everything baked in to protect those known assets. Versus when you move to the cloud, you're going to have to replicate some of that stuff, and you need to be aware of what changes when you are in the cloud. But we're also at a point where it's not, I think the difference is becoming smaller and smaller, especially when you get into, getting into like true cloud native architecture. The whole world is API calls now, and that's only going to become of growing import. The containers are shifting scope a little bit to where now they're doing infrastructure things and more data storage things, and they're trying to be less operating things. Everything is kind of moving towards, we're making a call that does a thing. Mm-hmm. So, It's a great question, and it's one of the things where if you another answer there is on-prem and cloud can be the exact same set of security. It really depends on what controls you put in place and what your architecture looks like.
Yeah, it's almost like saying the cloud is secure, but are you using it securely?
Yeah.
And that's what these tools and solutions are made to do, because everyone's kind of getting siloed into, we just do one thing now. So you just got to make sure that you got your head wrapped around the stuff that you're doing, which brings me to the next question here. Saqib asked a question about our tool, but we can talk about it in a holistic way if we want. But he wants to know if our tool provide an option to address misconfigurations, or it just provides visibility to those misconfigurations.
That's a great question. So we have detailed recommendations on how to remediate. Ops Compass prides itself on being a read-only tool. We do not alter your environment, but we give you everything that you need for the steps to remediate your environment so that you can be in a compliant or no good state. Great question.
Yeah, and on top of that, if this misconfiguration, like if it concerns your team, like that, like we talked about being on the same team and having these daily stand-up meetings of getting a big idea of what you're working on. You know, we do a thing called manage concerns, and if this action, the way you set it up, concerns your team, you guys are the only ones that can know, and you could fix it and get on about your day. With some deep links into your inventory to the exact resource you need to work on. So yeah, thanks for that question. Let's see here. Yeah, so I think one of the one I was interested in asking was with the rise of pandemic and people that were, companies all of a sudden had to send people computers and for their home and get them ready to work from home for the next foreseeable future. What have you heard as far as like rising breach activity from the short-term planning of remote work instead of the long-term planning of everything else?
Yeah, it has definitely been a theme, and a pretty fascinating one. And honestly, I think that organizations have responded quite well, really. They have adapted tremendously. And I think that one of the things that also came to light, you said planning, and I think I think a lot of times there wasn't so much planning, but they had more work from home capabilities than they recognized. They were probably supporting certain telecommuters and IT resources being able to work remotely. So now it was just scaling it up. So, there was definitely a financial hit there, but I don't think it was necessarily, and some of the news, especially, a few months into the pandemic, was pretty interesting too, because it was a little bit of fear mongering, maybe. It was like organizations just opening everything up so that people can work from home, and it's like, no, it's not really like that. The other thing that I think has been instrumental is how much cloud services we as organizations are consuming. Mm-hmm. That's something that's really changed dramatically in the past 10, 15 years. It used to be that you had to buy your software and have all of your licensing and host everything, and everything was just these monolithic efforts to get a service going. And now, we have the problem of shadow IT. Well, this department doesn't want to use this messaging app, so they use a different one. And because it's, accessible to everybody and they have a free version, it's much easier to do that. So it's become a real challenge. This is, where the whole zero trust design of making sure that we're getting away from having administrators be administrators and getting to where we have privileged access management for operations that require escalated permissions, and making sure that people really only have access to the things that they need to have access to. These are all factors that go into creating that defense in depth, like layering the onion that goes with protecting an organization and its assets. It's complicated because the upside of shadow IT is it largely decentralizes your organization. So now that the attack vectors are more complicated, there's more of them, but you don't necessarily have one ginormous database that an attacker can easily go after, and it's readily apparent because it's within your network perimeter and it's the only thing listening on a SQL Server port, like whatever it is. Like it just, the landscape has changed, and it cuts both ways.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I've done more two-factor authentication on stuff in the last 14 months than I ever have.
Yeah, it's and clicking those OKs to acknowledge the cookies. Like we're doing a lot to secure all the things. The it definitely has become everybody's problem, and I think that kind of makes us want to shy away from maybe having the dialogue that needs to be had around it. What is an information security program? What does secure development even mean? Like that's a hard thing. I don't have time to do that stuff. And this is where, plugging tooling into your pipeline, where you can take some of that onus away from the developers and put it onto the DevOps people, apparently. Everybody has to, everybody's involved in this, right? Like it's not an easy solution, but it's not the end of the world either. I think it's an exciting space. And I think that it's weird to think about how nobody knew what a hacker was. They didn't know that there was such thing as a good hacker and a bad hacker, right? Are we talking about golf now? What are we talking about? So, that the whole world has changed. And I think taking accountability is something organizations have always had to do with their data. They're trying to protect their assets. Well, now you're also protecting other people's assets as well. And I think that kind of complicates the landscape. But having that, dialogue around on-prem versus cloud, Gartner's statistic, 2024, 80% of organizations will have some services in the cloud. It's not a surprise. It's like, really, it's not already that way. Like it's growing. And so, even if it wasn't as secure, it would have to change, because there are many benefits to migrating to the cloud. And there are many benefits of cloud native architecture that I don't even think have come to fruition yet. So it's exciting.
And now people are doing it with security deeply ingrained as you do it. Cause in the past, it was probably like, let the developers work, let the operations work, and we'll hopefully security team okays it. Now you're doing it all together with security ingrained into the process. So you don't have to go back and change things. It's almost like I probably should drink more water every day. We should probably think about security as we go along this journey.
Yeah, it's a part of everybody's charter. It really is. This is what we need to be successful, like regardless of what we do. And it's neat that this is just becoming baked into it. So I think the shift to DevSecOps is a really good thing. You can't have some guy in the background, the sky is falling. You've got to be a part of the team. And I think that part of that challenge there is making it so that security is putting value on the table too. And beyond just we're making sure that we have disaster recovery and we're making sure that we're safe. There's got to be a way for security to add value.
Yep. So we have another question here. So we have about 10 minutes left, and so I think if you're cool with it, we'll just open up some questions and then bring it home. But Armana has another question. How can we effectively implement a cloud security strategy?
Excellent question. If you do not currently have an information security program, start to formalize it. And this does not have to be a big, long, exhaustive effort. Pick a security framework. NIST cybersecurity framework is targeted at private sector, and it's pretty lightweight. All of the security frameworks, they set out to accomplish the same things. So if you're meeting the requirements of NIST CSF, when it comes to a privacy regulation like GDPR or HIPAA, you're already going to be doing the right things. That's really important to understand. You need to just start coming up with your set of minimum controls. You're worried about cloud specifically, but it isn't really different than on-prem. And in fact, it stands to be better. Maybe on-prem, you don't encrypt your databases because you're like, we got a strong perimeter. That's not how it is anymore. Like now we have to, there's not a performance hit like there was. Let's do the encryption where we have to. Let's actually do some data classification. Let's look at what we have. Let's look at whether or not we need it. Let's look at how long we actually need it for. Data retention period is an opportunity to save on costs as well. So just starting to write down those security requirements and electing to do the right thing and getting that to permeate your culture, I think is a wonderful first step. You may also want to start looking at a risk management strategy where you step back and you say, hey, how can this thing being adversely impacted impact the organization, and what do we do to manage that risk? I think both of those provide some really good ways to go about not just with cloud security strategy, but building more of a security practice into your entire organization so that it permeates the culture.
Nice. I saw just yesterday, was it Salipsky, the CEO of AWS, was at Reinforce was yesterday, and his quote was it Reinvent? I thought it was Reinforce. I don't know. Yeah, I think it's new, but the Reinvents I believe in. I don't know, it doesn't matter. The quote was, if security doesn't work, we don't have a business. And I was just like, well, I think you're onto something, AWS. I think you're a successful company. You have a bright future.
Yeah. We're no longer just the redheaded step kid in the room. It's instrumental. So I think we owe a special thanks to Armand for asking so many questions. That was fantastic. I know we had others as well, but really appreciate the discussion, everyone.
Yeah, we have a comment from Paul. He said, security inclusion seems like it should be included in your agile development environment, so it is built from the bottom up.
Without a doubt. And that's going cloud native is, again, where CSPM kind of comes into play. So, the static code analysis tools that were supposed to plug into your IDE and provide you these great recommendations so that you're fixing things in a near proactive manner, they're expensive, they're slow, they don't work really good, they need a lot of tuning to get rid of a lot of the false positives and things like that. They're great solutions, but they need a lot of loving care. And an easier way to go about that might be just defining this set of requirements that goes into it. So a lot of things that a lot of people don't consider when they're making changes is having a security review process. This can be very, very lightweight. It does not need to be onerous. Let's just come up with, 3 to 5 questions to make sure that everything that we design, we are considering the right things. And, have opportunities for those 3 to 5 questions to balloon into more if it's appropriate, right? But let's just make sure that we're considering this every time that we make a change. And it's also, the difficulty is that isn't, it's not the failing of the devs that they aren't designing securely. It's the failing of the definition of the change, not requiring security, right? They are doing what they are told to do, and then we're saying, no, wait a minute, you're not doing enough. You have to go and do more. That's not entirely fair. And in order for, if that is the direction, then we have to make it so that they can be successful doing that, right? And that's more than just a little bit of training or here's another tool. So
Awesome. Okay, well, I think we got 5 minutes left, and so I'm going to hand it over. Well, first off, thank you so much for sitting and listening to us talk. It was a good discussion. I enjoyed it, and we're going to kick it over to Charlene for the raffle.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, John and Benjamin. What a great presentation, what a great conversation. I just love to have these conversations or to hear these conversations between two very, very smart people such as yourself. So thank you very much. But yes, just a quick reminder that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of the event, or if you just want to listen to the conversation again, you will have the opportunity to do so. We will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand after today's event. The webinar is also going to be living on the DevOps.com website, so you can go find it there. Just go to DevOps.com/webinars and look in the on-demand section, and it should be right there. I also want to echo John and Benjamin's thank yous for everybody who did submit questions, because there were some really great ones, and lots of good information in today's presentation and in the question and answer session. So. Thank you very much for that. I also want to go ahead and do that drawing for the $425 Amazon gift cards. So without further ado, let's go ahead and do that. Our first winner today is Armin C. Congratulations, Armin, who had so many great questions in. Today is your day. All right.
Well deserved. Well deserved.
He kind of owns the webinar today, I think. So the second winner today is Bianca P. Congratulations, Bianca. Our third winner today is Jordan M. Congratulations, Jordan. And our fourth winner today is Wendy Q. Congratulations, Wendy. We're going to be following up with all four of you by email to get your gift card over to you. So please check your inbox. And if you don't see anything there, please check your spam folder. Everybody's like, yeah, I got it. So anyway, well, again, I do want to thank everybody for joining me today. And a special thank you to John and Benjamin for, as I said, such a great conversation, and love to have you guys back on anytime to continue the conversation. So, but until then, this is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am signing off. Have a great day, everybody, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.